Hey, what's up? This is Scott from Syntax, and since we talked about SST on Syntax today, I thought it would be great to show you it in action in a real practical sense. So if you didn't catch that episode, go listen to the episode right now. It's out today on the channel, and Wes and I actually go through SST, talk about some of the code and why you might use it. So if you really need a prepper before watching this, that's a great place to do so. Basically, SST is a way to have infrastructure as code, so that way you're defining your infrastructure in a single config file that can then deploy where you need to deploy. Now, since this is based on a standard that uses Terraform, we can actually deploy to many different places. You can use all kinds of different services with this, and that means you can deploy things quickly and easily to something like AWS, or you can have it automatically update your DNS on Cloudflare or even ship to deploy to Cloudflare. In fact, if you head into their docs, you can really see all of the different providers and services, 150 plus Pulumi. I think that's how you say it. Correct me if I'm wrong. And Terraform providers. And there is just a big old list of providers here that work with SST. It's really quite incredible. What I'm going to be doing in this video is we're going to be getting a SvelteKit site deployed with SST, and then I'm going to show a little bit about how to work in the SST config files, how we can quickly and easily add services, and you can just see really nice and easily just how easy this is to get going on services like, AWS stuff that isn't always the most friendly to work in. And the cool thing about most of this is you hardly need to go into the AWS console at all. Now, I will say there is going to be a prerequisite to actually being able to follow along to this. You'll want to head to sst.dev, and then you'll want to head into how to AWS account. So sst.dev, docs, how to AWS accounts. The reason why is there are some steps here that you need to get going about managing and creating your AWS account, your IAM identity center, setting all this stuff up so that way you can actually quickly and easily deploy to AWS like we will be in this video. So I am already set up with AWS. I'm already logged in with my SSO into AWS as well, so that way deployment shouldn't actually be any kind of issue. And the reason why we're not going deep into this is because this could take, 5-10 minutes or so. And I want to make this video more about SST than about AWS because while AWS is just one of the possibilities for deployment in this thing, that is what I'm going to be utilizing. So just keep that in mind. Now, what's cool about SST is that the getting started documents are really good. So documentation, you're not documents. So depending on whatever you're working in, you should be able to find something to get started. Like for instance, Next.js, right here. You have a Drizzle-based site, a Svelte-based site using SvelteKit, a Hono-based site, a Dino-based site. All of these things have good examples on how to get going. So let's say you just listened to the Syntax episode on Nuxt and you're like, I'm going to deploy my Nuxt site on SST. You come in here, it tells you exactly what to do. And in fact, there's typically just an init script that goes through and does stuff for you. Now, the Svelte version of this is just what we're going to be doing here. You'll see that the documentation says that there's two different ways to deploy a SvelteKit app, whether that's serverless or within containers. Now, containers is where it's going to run the full node setup, where serverless is going to run a SvelteKit site where each of your routes is essentially like a function. And this is really great when it works because it happens automatically. You still get access to things like server-side rendering, but your application can run in a serverless manner. And I found this to be just really nice on SST, on AWS, easy to get going. And in fact, this is how I typically deploy my SvelteKit sites even on something like Cloudflare, right? Using their Cloudflare workers. So let's go ahead and talk about what we need to do to get started. First, they're going to tell you to create a SvelteKit site. I've already done that. You can go ahead and create a SvelteKit site. The new way to do that is with npx sv create. SV is the new creation utility. It's really nice. You can create a SvelteKit site any way you want, or you can work with an existing SvelteKit site. You can see I have mine right here. It is a bare bones site. There is nothing to it. It is made with the exact purpose of this video. So not a whole lot going on, basic SvelteKit app. So when we check this out, it says that we need to run npx SST latest init. Now I'm using pnpm. The equivalent of that is pnpx. You can use npx. You can use anything as long as you know what you're typing in. And we're going to do SST at latest init. Now this is going to be really nice because you'll get to see just what a cool experience SST is overall, because it really allows you to get going without a whole lot of pain. Now, there will be some pain associated with this, but it's almost always going to be your own doing. Anytime I hit snags, it's because it was something that I didn't understand about how either AWS worked or what I was typing, and I just needed to look at the docs a little bit more. So as long as you're the type of person who can dive into those things, or follow along to a video like this, you're not going to have any trouble. And again, you can follow along with the Next base site as well, and it should work just the same, or who knows, Next.js if you want. So pnpx SST at latest init. Okay, we hit that, and you can see what this is going to do is it's going to detect what kind of application we're going to go on. And so it says SvelteKit detected, like some kind of robot from Chopping Mall or something. This will create an SST config and add SST. Continue? Yes. I'd love to continue. And I love wizards like this. And this isn't an ad here, but Sentry at sentry.io has a really great wizard for this too. The wizard to add Sentry to your SvelteKit app is gold standard in my opinion, where it modifies your code, doesn't break anything, just gets you all going. And SST is very much like that. One thing I even like about the SST wizard is that you don't even have to specify what type of project it is. SST is able to figure that out on its own. Perfect. So not only did this add, and in fact, we can see what it added in a second, but I can tell you it's going to add the Svelte adapter for SST. Now, the reason why you need an adapter for this is so that it works correctly with your serverless functions, those types of things, instead of like maybe a static site or an adapter node. So this is an easy fix. We basically copy this line right here, and if you've worked in SvelteKit at all, you know their adapter pattern's really flexible. We do our config, Svelte config, and we just replace this adapter auto with adapter SST. Easy, right? I would imagine that any of these other platforms that need the same type of treatment will. So yeah. Okay, so let's see what else it added. In addition to adding that adapter for us, it also added an SST dependency. You might be wondering why it's a dependency and not a dev dependency. SST actually has a runtime component to it if you'd like, where you can connect to your resources and use them directly from SST resources in your code itself. So that's why this is one of your dependencies here. In addition to that, you did see that there is the SvelteKit adapter for SST as well. SvelteKit SST. So super cool. That's really all we need to get going. The other thing it gave us was an SST config file. This SST config file looks a little bit something like this. I have no idea why this is giving me a red squiggly right now. It never has before. So just one of the mysteries of TypeScript, right? And it created a SST directory. Now this .sst directory, just like many other directories like .SvelteKit, this thing is generated, which means that you can nuke it at any time and it will regenerate. So you can see here that it's given us some default config. Now the default config here is pretty much what we need to get going, because as long as I'm logged in to my AWS, we should be able to see at least an attempt to get this going. So let's go ahead. And so from here we can run pnpm or npm run. In pnpm you just run pnpm. I guess guess run, you have to run a script. So either way, it's pnpm, npm, and then SST deploy. Okay, there's a whole SST dev environment stuff too we'll talk about in just a minute. And you can see it actually gave me an error at first. When it added these things, it didn't run npm install or pnpm install. So when I ran pnpm SST deploy, it failed. You run pnpm install, you're all good. Oops. I don't know why the Svelte one actually runs npm install. So I guess I'm just used to that. So pnpm SST deploy. Now, I can't promise this will be smooth every single time. Like, for instance, right now I ran it and it's telling me that the security token that I'm sending with my single sign-on isn't actually correct. Now, the reason for that is because how I set up my AWS setup when I was setting it up. I have different profiles. I have different profiles that are being used, and the profile that I'm currently logged into in AWS is not being used here. It's actually just trying to use my normal AWS account. It's not trying to use the profile. So if you're seeing something like this and you know you're logged in, what you need to do here inside of your app config is you need to head into a new property here named providers. And inside of providers, we give this an AWS provider, and then we give it a profile. Now, many times what you'll see is you'll see people do something like this. Input.stage is equal to production, then use profile for prod, or otherwise profile for staging or dev, whatever you call this, right? This allows you to deploy maybe like a staging or a dev environment on AWS and still have it work. And then you can just specify that with SST deploy -- stage, then the name of the stage, right? Production would give you to the production, the profile here. Now this needs to be the name of the profile. Now, I'm going to share with you really quick that I have something deployed with this account, and my profile is named after a project that I do called Habit Path. Habit Path is a habit tracker that I'm deploying using SST. Now, since I don't want to go ahead and set up a whole nother profile system and stuff, I'm going to just use that Habit Path production profile. That's the name of the profile that I created, and therefore I'm going to use it like this. Now, if you're following the SST docs and you did take a step to do all of the how-to setup with AWS stuff that we talked about before this whole thing worked, that's going to explain a lot of the information about profiles. And you can see that in your AWS config, you're using profile, Acme Dev or Acme Production. So the name where I got my profile came from this whole bit. So I would imagine if you run through this, you have that profile name all set up. And if not, it's no big deal. Again, you can just follow along and then run through their documentation when you're ready to go. Just want to show you some of this in action. So with Habit Path in production, this should actually be using the right profile to which I'm signed in on. Now the my web name here, this is going to be the name of the resource that is present anytime you're looking at this thing. So I might want to give this a name that is not my web here, because this right here, the async run section, is where you define all of your services within SST. Now I'm going to get into this more just a little bit, but new SST.aws.something is a very typical way of how you work within SST. And in this particular case, there is a special SvelteKit one, and the name of it is just the name of it. So SST demo, okay? You can call it that for now, just so I don't, I know what it is when I look at it. So since I should be good to go, let's try pnpm SST deploy right now. And you can see it's actually deploying, or at least it's saying that it's going to deploy, which means that it accepted my profile name, it knows what's going on, and we should be good to go here. Whether or not this actually deploys is a different thing. It typically should. You can see it's doing a whole lot of work for us, because as it's doing all of this, SST is not just, it's not like Vercel or something like that, where you just give it a build command, it runs a build command and deploys. What SST is actually doing is is setting up your whole infrastructure. So beyond just setting up the SST, it's creating an asset policy, a public access block, a assets bucket. So it's creating an S3 bucket for you. It's creating all of these resources behind the scenes that your applications will use to function with. All kinds of stuff, cache policy, server role, just you can see just so many different things that it's handling, which is one of the reasons why I love SST, because I don't want to get in to this stuff on my own. I just straight up don't. I also do believe in infrastructure as code as being a good idea. So for me, I really like this approach. I like that I don't have to get into AWS land. I like that I can have everything defined in my code base itself. That worked. Now, it took a little bit long on my end. Now, the reason it took such a long time on my end is my internet right now is being terrible. So if it took a long time on your end, hey, maybe that's just how it happens. But now, one thing you'll notice about the success screen is that it gives us a link to sst.dev, as well as a link to the site itself. I'm going to open up both of these. Now, this sst.dev link is the SST developer console. This is where you set up things like auto deploy or check out your logs or make sure that your builds happen or look at error logs, that type of thing. Examine why something did or didn't work. And SST console is their paid product. It's what keeps SST going. Now, there is an extremely generous free tier. I've never had to pay for SST. That said, if you have a big application, it makes sense to pay for it if you're using it. I don't think it's predatory by any means, so I wouldn't think twice about paying for this product. Again, not an ad, just how I feel personally. Now, when you first get to that sst.dev link, it's going to make you sign up for an account. It made me sign up for an account. I did. You can see some of the things I'm currently hosting. My Habit Path app, just a zero sync app that I made that's a chat app, and then SST, this Svelte site that we just made. So you can see if I click this, you can see that we have all of the outputs I have, which is the SST demo site, as well as all of the different services. All of the different services, as well as any time that there's been a deploy, it gets added here to the updates. There's issues if there were problems. You can even connect it to your AWS account. You can set up logs here. And if we head back to this page by clicking the main section here for our workspace, if you click this top where it says SST Svelte, it takes you to a different screen. You might not notice this, where there is settings for auto deploy. This will show you every time your application is auto deployed, and under settings, you can connect it to your GitHub. You give it a repo that you select as being the repo this is tied to. I've already connected my GitHub. You'll have to connect yours. Then you can connect this and get that, NPM deployed to production whenever you do a GitHub push to the right branch. Okay, so that's the console. It's a really neat thing. We're not going to go too in depth on it. There's a lot here, but for the most part, it's able to just see what's going on in your application, and it is their paid product. Let's go ahead and take a look at our app to see if it in fact deployed. So I've arrived at the URL here, which is this random selection of characters and then cloudfront.net. If you've ever seen CloudFront, you know that that's their CDN, so we're getting a CloudFront CDN in this without necessarily even specifying it. So that's great for us. It's something I would have wanted to do anyways. Okay, so we have our application. It's clearly working. It's on the internet. Now, if you wanted to, let's say, give this a domain. Now, I have most of my domains hosted on Cloudflare. With that, if you're hosting a domain on Cloudflare, as long as you set a couple of env variables, and I'm not going to actually give you my env variables here, but there's a couple of env variables you need to get. You need to get the Cloudflare API token and the Cloudflare default account ID. If you have these two, I'm just going to give it a non-real value. If you have these two in your env file, whenever you give a domain inside of your SST config to anything, it's actually going to go into Cloudflare and update your DNS records for you. You don't have to do anything, and it will get your domain online. It's Really neat. And to do that, obviously this will break deployment because I'm not giving you my real Cloudflare stuff here, but you would come in here inside of this where you define your service and you give it some additional options. So we comma and then you have your options. And inside of these options, there is a domain property. Inside of the domain property, you can give it a name, so your domain name. So tolin.ski, which is a real domain I have, but I'm not going to actually use it. And then you give it a DNS value, which is where you can configure the service for your DNS. So if I was going to be using a Cloudflare DNS, in fact, sorry, this is not an object, this is just a property value here, you use sst.cloudflare.dns like this. And that's it. You just have this like this. And as long as you own that domain, it's connected to the account of the API credentials you gave it. When you go to click deploy, it's going to provision and get your DNS set up for you. It's really pretty amazing. So if that is something you are interested in, again, follow along at the SST documentation here. You just need to actually, one thing that I do is I just kind of come in here and always, I always look just at these, the docs. The docs are really good. The AI assistant's actually really good. I wonder if I type in Cloudflare if it's gonna show me what I want here. It's funny that I'm failing at this, but the easiest way to see this in action is to go to the how-to section and then custom domains, and it will show you give it a domain or you give it a domain name and then DNS. If your domain is hosted at AWS, you can do it this way. Again, if your domains are hosted on Vercel, you do it this way. Here's what I was talking about with the Cloudflare. You add Cloudflare here, you give it these credentials in your env, and you set it up like I showed you. Either way, if you need a domain here and you don't want to set up the DNS on your own, you can do it this way. Now, another one might be if your domains are hosted who knows where. Google domains got bought, and now they're on Squarespace. I've never even logged in on my Squarespace to check on those. They just renew somehow. If you did that, you can follow these manual directions and get your domains going. Okay, so let's talk about SST Dev before we add another service. Now, I know everybody is really used to doing npm run dev, pnpm dev, all that stuff. But SST has a built-in dev environment that actually runs your functions as functions. So that way the development environment mimics your production environment. Because you're running your code a certain way with serverless functions, you kind of want to know what you're up against when you're working like that. So if we do pnpm SST dev, this will just kind of inherently pick up the dev command in your script, and it's going to get you going in a dev environment. And which is really neat. It gives you a local console as well. It tells you the stage, it tells you the app, it deploys your things like you typically might expect it to do, like it does in production. And at the end of this, like I said, my internet's being really slow right now. At the end of this, you just get a normal dev URL and you can work in this application just like you typically would in a development environment. Now, the reason you'd want to do this beyond that is if you are using different services. So like if I'm using an S3 bucket and I want to test that, or I'm using RDS, I'm using any of these AWS services, a database, whatever. Many times you want to be able to pass those resources into the runtime of your application. And to do that, you would need to then run SST dev. Otherwise, that stuff's not going to work correctly for you. So it might feel a little heavy-handed for SST to take over your dev environment, and I promise it's not this slow usually. I don't know what's going on with my internet, but it's not that SST will, it does seem scary that it takes over your dev environment, but it does so for a good reason, especially if your application relies on various services and how they're connected, and you want it to just all seamlessly work. Okay, you can see here that my internet finally kicked back in and is deployed at least to development mode. You can see that we have our console as well as the dev of our actual application. Now, the more services you use, the more things that will show up in the sidebar. So if you have a server like I had a zero sync site, the zero sync server showed up in here because that's a whole process. I had a replication manager service that's showing up in here. All these things that are running are going to show up as different services over here. You can use your keyboard to do any of this stuff. There's keyboard. I'm a mouse clicking guy. I know that drives people nuts sometimes, but you can see here that we are given our domain, and from this point forward, this will function exactly like our typical dev environment. In fact, if we head to our route, we can say welcome to SST. It's not any slower than what you're used to, okay? It's just a nice little thing that you can have in addition to all of the deployment. You get access to a development environment that, again, utilizes the services in your infrastructure. So I'm going to stop that with Command-C like normal, head back into our SST. Okay, cool. So inside of our async run here is where you're going to define most of your stuff. And I can show you just a little bit of a more intricate SST config that I've done. And you're going to see, because this is a TypeScript file, you can run JavaScript in here, believe it or not. I'm even importing read file sync in here for some stuff I got to do. So there's console specific properties inside of our config because I wanted to specify a node version for the auto deploy. Okay, so let's minimize that. Inside of my app, I gave it a name. I give it my removal, my protect, my home is AWS providers, and I did exactly what I was telling you before. Like, what is the stage? You can tell I did this right because I misspelled habit path in the dev environment and just didn't care. I'm not going to deal with it. It's fine. I don't care about that. I did specify Cloudflare as a provider, command because I needed to run some commands. I did specify the region, and then you get into your run business. Now within your run business, again, this is just a load schema function that loads up the schema for zero sync. Here's a version number for zero that I wanted to use in pin, and none of that stuff is super important. What gets important is when we get into the definition of services. So for instance, I created a VPC, a virtual private cloud, using SST AWS.VPC. Okay, easy enough. Bastion allows me to tunnel into it if I need to, which you may. There's a lot of intricacies here that we're not going to cover in this video. I just want to show you getting going with SST and a little bit about it beyond what we did in the podcast. And then we have an ECS cluster where I'm then able to utilize this cluster. I'm attaching it to my VPC, and I am saying, here's my cluster. And then I have a database, which is using sst.aws.postgres. I wanted a database. I did it with this. I'm then once again passing in my VPC. I'm giving it a name. I have some special things about logical replication that I need for zero sync. Typically you won't need that stuff. And then I'm able to specify, which I'm not going to show you, a dev database address, because in SST, if you're working with a database like this, it might be just straight up easier to actually connect to a local DB instead. So I gave it my local dev DB credentials in here. That way when I run SST dev, it utilizes that. I can build my connection string by actually utilizing the variable here, database dot username dot password dot host, and then using this interpolate string template literal to go ahead and create the DB connection string, which I'm then able to pass into things. Now you can also set secrets, which you set via the command line. Those secrets can be then used inside of your config in various ways to pass into your applications or to transform or whatever. These are basically env variables that you can set from the command line. Now this is using some out-of-date syntax, but it is just loading up one of my containers, so it is using a service on my cluster. I'm able to set up an email service as well. Now, if you are setting up an AWS email service, you will need to go into their console and mess with some stuff, get approved, send some test emails, yada, 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 that type of thing. And then you can see I am, in fact, using SvelteKit as well. Now, one thing you may notice here is that we're using a link property occasionally importantly, link allows you to link two separate resources together. So in just 1 second here, we're going to do exactly that. Let's get rid of this one and let's head back to our SST dev here, because in these docs, and we're going to follow along with some docs that they actually have on their own. If we do the getting started and we do Svelte, you'll see that if we come down here, it tells you to add an S3 bucket. I think this is a good demo, and so I'm going to utilize this demo as well. So if we want to add a second service to our current one, you can create a const bucket is equal to new sst.aws.bucket, and then you give it a name, SST demo bucket, really creative name here, comma, and then we have some options. Now I'm going to make this access public, just because. Now, if you weren't going to be utilizing this resource and linking it to something else, there's no reason why you couldn't just have it like this. It's going to create that bucket. But since we want to be able to link the bucket to our SST site here, we'll want to go ahead and create a variable for it. For then, inside of our options, we can utilize the link property and pass in our bucket, which means that we can now access this bucket in runtime code via sst.resource inside of our Svelte Kit application. And that's really pretty special because it allows you to do this with the connection of your resources in a way that makes your development environment really similar and with the same code as your production environment. I'm not having to have several different env files. I'm not having to do a lot of checks, if this then that, then show this thing or use this code. I'm able to just use sst.resource and get access to that information. And in fact, let's go ahead and do that with a very simple image upload form that, again, they're providing us to us in their docs. I think this is a worthwhile demo. So we're going to add a new script here. I'm going to do lang ts. Why not, right? I guess that's not living on the wild side. I'm gonna have to translate this to Svelte 5 code. This is Svelte 4 code. If you don't care about Svelte, fast forward until we're getting this going and I'm showing you the AWS stuff. We're going to say const data is equal to $props, like this. And then we're going to say const, and check this out. I'm going to actually name this onSubmit because you'll see why in just a little bit. I'm going to name this onSubmit is equal to an async function with E. Again, this is Svelte 5 code, and so it'll make sense in a second, where we do need to call e.prevent default. And reason being is that Svelte 5 does no longer has this pipe prevent default, which is sad to me personally. Out of all the changes in Svelte 5, I think that might be one I dislike, just because I liked it. And so from here, we're going to say const form data is equal to new form data, and we're going to get e.target. Okay, e.target. Then we're going to say const file is equal to form data.get, and then file. Okay, so nice and easy here. This is giving us our e.target. Now from here, we're going to say const image is equal to await fetch data typing URL, and we're going to pass in body is equal to the file itself. The method is going to be a put, and the headers are going to be equal to content type file.type. Okay, whether that's an image or not, content disposition. I regret doing TypeScript because now I'm going to have to deal with these types. Attachment file name is equal to, and then string interpolate this file.name. Okay, now from here we can go ahead and create our form. Now our form, we're going to keep it pretty simple. The form action is not going to be anything, but what we can do with this new Svelte 5 syntax is just say onSubmit, and that's it. We don't have to specify anything else. That's really super nice. From here we can have an input, and the type is going to be file. The name is going to be file. And we're going to accept an image /PNG or an image JPEG. So just so that the UI understands what we're accepting here. And then lastly, we'll have a button, which is just upload. And it's going to be a type of submit. Okay, sorry that was long-winded, but the reason why we're showing you this is because this data.url is going to come in from our server-side loader. Now, in SvelteKit or any way you want to do this operation on the server side, the way you do it in Svelte is by having a page.server.ts. Okay, this is going to be your load function. What this is going to do is head to AWS, use our SST resource, and then pass that signed URL into the UI of the application via the data props. Okay, so now that we have this resource here, let's actually write a bit of code that allows you to connect things. So export async function load is going to be just a simple loading function. If you've ever done this in SvelteKit, you'll know what to do here. But if you haven't, this is a good opportunity to see how this works. Either way, all we're doing is getting a signed URL from our SST config on the server side. So we can say const command is equal to new put object command. This is an S3 thing that you're going to be importing. In fact, put object command is coming directly from AWS client SS3. And in fact, let's just go ahead. I'm going to copy these straight here so you can see it without it. I mean, we'll have red underlines here and there, but we're going to be bringing in S3 client and put object command from client SS3. We're going to be bringing in get signed URL from S3 request pre-signer, and we're going to be bringing in resource from SST. Now, resource is the thing that I've been talking about, and that's what's most important, I think, in this section of this video. So we're going to be calling this new command. Actually, you know, while we're here, let's go ahead and install these things. So any means that you typically use to install things, just go ahead and do that. New pnpm add S3 client. I'm sure there's a faster way of doing this, so don't roast me. And then we already have SST, so bring in these two and it should get rid of that concern there. Okay, restart language server, restart TypeScript server. There we go. Okay, so let's head back to the demo that we're following. And within that demo, it says to first give your object command a capital K key, which is crypto.random UUID, okay? And then also what the bucket is. So bucket, and then this is where the SST stuff gets interesting, because inside of our application, in our runtime code, we can finally get access to our resource dot whatever the bucket's name was. So if we go to our SST config, you remember I named it something interesting. It was SST demo bucket. So I grab that bucket name. So resource dot SST demo bucket dot name. Now I haven't deployed since I added this bucket, so it's going to say that it doesn't exist for right now, but that will fix itself. And then we can click save. Now this resource dot, the resource name, is a flow that you will use for defining database credentials, for linking buckets, or even URLs if you create a private URL or something. There's a lot of interesting things you can do just by grabbing this resource. But I do understand if you are skittish about bringing SST into your actual code, because that brings you into some sort of lock-in, right? And in that case, I do have something for you. At any given point inside of any of your things here, we can specify an environment like this. And this is going to be where you put your environment variables. So in the situation where you didn't want to actually use that resource name here, you could always specify bucket name as equal to, and then you can use the $ interpolate bucket.name. Exactly like what I did here where I was able to grab the database name. If you were to just pass in bucket.name here, this would not work. You do need to use this interpolate to get the actual value, okay? So you could utilize this, and then that would become accessed as process.env.bucket name like you're typically used to, if you don't want to use the resource thing. So that works as well, okay? So we have this here, SST demo bucket, all that is good, and we can then const URL is equal to await get signed URL new S3 client, and then we just pass in the command. Forgot one paren there. There we go, wrong parens. And then we can simply return this signed URL as data like this. Now this is going to solve a couple of things for us if we have this like this. You can pause the video here and copy this code, but granted, it's the exact same thing that's on the SST dev docs. You can copy it from there too. What that does is it now gives us this data.url, which the next time we run svelte sync, this will fix this TypeScript error. Let's go ahead and see this in action. In fact, after this is all said and done, I'm simply going to just console log image right here, because that should be able to tell us if this uploaded or not successfully. So let's head back and let's once again add pnpm sst dev. I had stopped that to install some things. Pnpm sst dev this time is not only going to just get us up and running with our current config, but it's also, as you can see here, creating our bucket. So anytime you add things, you will see created. Anytime you remove things, it will say destroyed, or I think destroyed, or deleted. There it is, deleted. So it deletes and creates things, updates things as needed. Okay, so here we are. We're up and running. You could see much faster that time. My ISP must have gotten its shit together, and we can come back here. So the first thing I'm going to do is going to open up my console here and get rid of this what's new business and just have it nice and big. And then I'm going to click choose file and choose a file. I've got my image here. It's a photo of Chad Whitaker from Syntax. Chad is a new member to the Syntax team. I'm going to click upload here, and you can see we've gotten a response. This time it has given us a URL. Now that URL again is going to be public because we specified that we wanted this bucket to be public. So let's go ahead and check out this URL and see if this thing uploaded. So now I'm going to have the URL in here without the query params, and I'm going to hit enter, and you can see it downloaded the image, which means that this is coming directly from an AWS bucket. We've got that actual URL for what this thing is, and that means we could work with this as a real asset in our application. I mean, you've essentially just built an image uploader that now you can utilize these images. And in fact, if we wanted to just drop that image directly into our code base for some reason, hard coded in here, let's just get rid of all these extra quotes. Oh my word, let's get rid of all of these extra query params. We don't want them. And let's get rid of alt text for now because we're just trying to get this to show up. Just the URL. There we go. Just the URL for the image itself. And there's Chad. Hey, what's up, Chad? So we got it working here. So we've built a nice little image uploader, and this is a nice little project so that way you can see everything that SST can do. Now, I've shown you how to link resources. I've shown you environment variables. I've shown you domains. There's a lot else. SST is a deep well. I could be talking on this stuff for days. There's so many cool things you can do with SST, but as you've seen by me following some of the documentation with you here, the docs are really good. They help you out with a lot of stuff, and the only hiccup you might have is, Svelte 4 code. That's not a huge hiccup, but if you use any of these services or any of these things, the documentation is there to help you. The AI tool is decent. Just don't trust everything it says. Go and look it up in the actual docs. Follow some examples that exist. There's a lot of great stuff in here, and you can get really complex with SST having a ton of different services. So let me know what you thought of this. Was it tough to get AWS running? Did you get it running? Did you choose to use Cloudflare? What are you deploying on SST? Are you already using it? Do you think this thing is viable? Me personally, I like SST because I don't have to host my things on an AWS wrapper. There's a lot of AWS wrappers out there. I don't have to host them on an AWS wrapper. I can host them on actual AWS without having to pay the middleman, right? Nice little bit. And if I can do Next.js there or SvelteKit site there or any of these things, I don't have to host on the middleman, okay? So check it out, sst.dev, a really neat project and something that I'm super interested. If you want to learn a little bit more about this, check out the syntax episode on SST. It's really great. Vice versa, if you came from the syntax episode and wanted to learn more here, welcome. Let me know if there's anything else you'd like to see or issues that you're having with SST. As always, this is Scott with Syntax. See you in the next one.